Rishi Sunak is the UK's new Prime Minister after securing support from more than half of Conservative MPs. He's now expected to see King Charles III. The UK's next leader, Rishi Sunak, will be the youngest Prime Minister in over 200 years and the first Hindu to ever take office.
President Zelensky slams Russian Defence Minister's claims that Kyiv is plotting to detonate a dirty bomb.
Rishi Sunak will be the UK's next Prime Minister after Penny Mordaunt confirmed she has dropped out of the leadership race. The former Chancellor had secured the backing of well over half of Tory MPs and was the only candidate remaining who had reached the support threshold. Penny Mordaunt said in a statement that it was clear that colleagues felt they needed certainty and urged the Conservative Party to unite behind Sunak. Boris Johnson's sudden decision to rule himself out the race to replace Liz Truss surprised many. In a statement on Sunday, he insisted he did have enough support, but he had decided it was not the right thing to do.
They feel with me.
He conceded he would struggle to unite his party in Parliament. Rishi Sunak, who will become Britain's first ever Hindu Prime Minister, enters Downing Street at a time of extreme economic difficulty in the UK. Sunak must now visit King Charles III, who is expected to formally ask Sunak to form a government. The UK's next leader, Rishi Sunak, will be the youngest Prime Minister in over 200 years and the first Hindu to ever take office.
Russian Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu has accused Ukraine of planning to detonate a radioactive dirty bomb and blame it on Moscow. Shoigu discussed what he described as the rapidly deteriorating situation in the Ukraine war over phone calls with NATO nations on Sunday. Without providing evidence, Shoigu told his French, British and Turkish counterparts of Russia's concerns, issuing a statement after his phone calls. A dirty bomb is a device that uses explosives to scatter radioactive waste. It does not have the devastating effect of a nuclear explosion, but it could expose large populations to radioactive contamination. Shoigu also held phone talks with US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin for the first time since May. In his nightly address, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky immediately hit back, accusing Moscow of blatant lies. He says if Russia calls and says that Ukraine is allegedly preparing something, it only means one thing: Russia has already prepared it. I believe that now the world should react as harshly as possible. Meanwhile, the situation in Kyiv remains tense, and whatever the likelihood of a dirty bomb attack, the back-and-forth accusations hold their own dangers of escalation.
Russia has urged more civilians in occupied Kherson to flee to escape an anticipated Ukrainian counter-offensive. The residents are told to take documents, money, valuables and clothes due to the tense situation on the front. About 25,000 people have been relocated since Tuesday, the Interfax news agency reported. The Institute for the Study of War said that the urgent calls to flee indicated that the occupiers do not expect a rapid Russian or civilian return to the city and appeared to be trying to depopulate it to damage its long-term social and economic viability. Russian authorities also likely cut the internet access in Kherson city on the 22nd of October to limit local reporting of Russian evacuations to the east bank of the Dnipro River, while preparing to conduct delaying actions that will likely be only partially effective, says the Institute for the Study of War. The think tank also reiterated that Russian forces are likely preparing to destroy the dam at the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, flooding and widening the Dnipro River to delay any Ukrainian advances. They are likely attempting to moderate the resultant flooding, claiming they're lowering the volume of water from the reservoir behind the dam to minimize damage. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu likely sought to slow or suspend Western military aid to Ukraine and possibly weaken the NATO alliance in scaremongering calls with several NATO defense ministers on the 23rd of October, claiming that Ukraine is preparing to conduct a false flag attack using a dirty bomb, that is a conventional explosive laced with radioactive materials that is not a nuclear weapon, to accuse Russia of using the weapons of mass destruction. Russian forces conducted massive missile and drone attacks to degrade Ukrainian energy infrastructure, hitting the regions of Volyn, Rivne, Kharkiv, Khmelnytsky, Kirovograd, Cherkasy, Zaporizhia, Odessa and Mykolaiv. 8 months into the full-scale invasion, the Institute for the Study of War says ongoing Russian strikes on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure are extraordinarily unlikely to erode the Ukrainian will to fight, but will increasingly pose an economic and humanitarian challenge for Ukraine as temperatures drop.
Under the rubble of Izium Hospital in eastern Ukraine, there are real examples of resilience. This medical facility was the only one to stay open when Russian troops overran the city in early March, not long after the invasion began. Surgeries moved to the basement to avoid airstrikes. Just a handful of doctors, nurses, paramedics and pathologists remained. Now they prepare for the winter after 6 deadly months under Russian occupation, drawing upon their harsh experiences. This surgeon says, "We slept for 2 hours. It was cold. The temperature was maybe 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. We had to heat liquids with our bodies to use them." The surgeon's house was destroyed in July, so he lived in the basement too. The city's hospital rapidly filled with the sick and wounded who needed help. The handful of medical staff who stayed found ways to also help Russians. We had 2 portable gurneys with a stretcher that acted as an operating table. This patient says that everyone fled. The hospital was empty, but this group of people stayed in the basement and saved lives. Everyone in Izium knew about it and knocked on their door, whether or not it was closed. These people have a calling. Not everyone could do it. Izium returned to Ukrainian hands last month during a counter-offensive that dealt a blow to Moscow's war efforts. However, whilst things return to a relative norm, it'll take a lot longer for the scars to heal for the local residents and medical staff.
French President Emmanuel Macron became the first foreign leader to hold talks with Italy's new Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. They met on Sunday as Macron carried out an official visit to Italy. Through an informal meeting, the pair discussed various European issues, including energy, migration and Ukraine. In a tweet afterwards, Macron said the pair had apparently vowed to work together with dialogue and ambition as Europeans and neighbours. Earlier, Meloni, who's Italy's first female prime minister, was sworn in as the country formed its first far-right government since World War II. Meloni's Brothers of Italy party, which has neo-fascist roots, came first in last month's national election, but it didn't win enough votes to govern outright, meaning Meloni had to turn to her 2 main right-wing allies, Matteo Salvini and former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi.
The women-led protests in Iran entered their 6th week on Sunday, as university students braved a military crackdown to challenge the government by holding rallies. However, clashes broke out between police and students at a prominent university, where male and female students on Saturday had sat next to each other at the university's restaurant, in defiance of the gender segregation rules of the Islamic Republic. Meanwhile, there have been solidarity protests, including one in Washington, D.C., where thousands of people, many of them Iranian, marched chanting justice for Iran and carrying banners that read, "Women, life, freedom."
My brothers and sisters back in Iran, they are on the streets, they're fighting for their life. I'm in a free country, and this is my obligation to talk.
Iran's anti-government protests were first sparked after the death of Mahsa Amini, died days after she was detained by the country's morality police for not abiding by the mandatory hijab dress code. Right-wing former Foreign Minister Andrzej Logar has won the most votes in Slovenia's first-round presidential election. But he will face his centre-left rival Nataša Pirc Musar in a runoff. Electors in the small Alpine EU country of 2 million people chose from 7 candidates standing for the largely ceremonial post. The second round will now take place in November.
Thousands of climate protesters marched through the streets of Brussels on Sunday. The demonstration came 2 weeks before the UN COP27 climate change conference in Egypt. Among their demands is a call for real measures and decisions, particularly to put more pressure on companies that pollute the most.